Okay guys, this is Mr. Manning, and today we're going to be going over the 2009 question 2 prompt for rhetorical analysis in preparation for the AP exam. I'll be reading through this text with you and kind of giving you some annotation and unpacking the text a little bit, trying to relate his purpose and discuss how his argument was constructed. So let's jump right in and go for this context section right here. The passage below is from The Indispensable Opposition, an article by Walter Lippmann. It appeared in the Atlantic Monthly in 1939. Read the passage carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the rhetorical strategies Lippmann uses to develop his argument. This is a bit unique because usually they give us a little bit more information. They might have told us who Walter Lippmann was, told us a little bit about the Atlantic Monthly, or given us some reason that it was written in 1939. It's left to us, though, to be able to take from that critical information that would help us understand this text and understand more fully the purpose. What does that mostly is going to be this year, of course, taken in context with the rest of the essay, but this year is important because of the rise of fascism in Europe. This would have been greatly talked about in the time period. So let's jump in and see if this is in fact connected to the rise of fascism in some way, and if that is the reason why they didn't really give us a whole lot of information. It's because they expected us to understand that immediately, given the topic discussed and the date. So first thing that I recommend that you do is go through and number your paragraphs. That makes it a little bit easier. If you're going to reference something, you can of course always use the line as a reference, but breaking it up by paragraphs makes it easier to chunk overall, which in turn makes it easier to decide what we're going to include in our paragraphs. So let's go ahead and jump right in with line 1, read through this and see if we can deduce what he's talking about. So from line 1. Were they pressed hard enough, most men would probably confess that political freedom, that is to say, the right to speak freely and to act in opposition, is a noble ideal rather than a practical necessity. As the case for freedom is generally put today, the argument lends itself to this feeling. It is made to appear that, whereas each man claims his freedom as a matter of right, the freedom he accords to other men is a matter of toleration. Thus, the defense of freedom of opinions tends to rest not on its substantial, beneficial, and indispensable consequences, but on a somewhat eccentric, a rather vaguely benevolent attachment to an abstraction. So, pretty tight, a lot of words in there that mean very specific things, very dense. Let's see if we can unpack a little bit. First thing that I noticed was this critical tone he begins with. I know that based on the word choice, were they pressed hard enough, most men would confess, right? Then he goes on to include his working definition for political freedom. This is important because now he has defined the parameters of his argument by giving a working definition of this idea of political freedom. It is no longer an abstraction, right? Because he's defined it there. His argument then is that, this is the important bit. Each man claims his freedom as a matter of right, but the freedom he accords to other men is a matter of toleration. So the argument then is that this idea that we stand up for the rights of others seems to be a bit hypocritical. Okay. I did notice this string of adjectives here. I also noticed the repetition in vowel sounds at the end, which is a great way to drive engagement. The repetition of sounds again here with this L sound at the end. People are attracted to repetition, and if it's subtle enough, they don't even notice that that's what's keeping their attention. Okay, let's move on to paragraph number 2. I think I grabbed everything useful there. It is all very well to say with Voltaire, quote, "I wholly disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. But as a matter of fact, most men will not defend to the death the rights of other men. If they disapprove sufficiently what other men say, they will somehow suppress those men if they can." This is a statement that he is using as evidence. And surely you have personally experienced this or are aware of instances where that is the case, where somebody may not agree with a statement that another person has said, and rather than discussing it with that person, rather than trying to understand how they came to those ideas and why they have issue, they become, aggressive in their disagreement and try to suppress those ideas. Pretty typical, also very human in nature, right? That's just kind of perhaps something that we have to deal with. The inclusion of Voltaire here is to improve credibility, but also to highlight this historical hypocrisy. This, then he is saying, this is a popular opinion. Let's change it. This opinion is very popular to say, but is hypocritical in reality, in that people do not actually do this. All right, let's move along to paragraph number 3. So, if this is the best that can be said for liberty of opinion, that a man must tolerate his opponents because everyone has a right to say what he pleases, then we shall find that liberty of opinion is a luxury, safe only in pleasant times when men can be tolerant because they are not deeply and vitally concerned. So, that is a luxury, that this liberty of opinion is a luxury. And again, we see with that repetition of sounds there. This is to say then that we only allow ourselves to say this whenever we are in pleasant times, whenever we are either in power or are comfortable, then we can say that. But if we feel threatened, or if we feel that the opinions against us, or not the opinions against us, but that the opinions of others directly contradict our own opinions, then we might be naturally inclined to violently react. So that seems to be the main message, the main argument that he's got, that this is a dilemma that needs to be addressed. So let's see how he does that. Paragraph 4. Yet, actually, as a matter of historic fact, there is a much stronger foundation for the great constitutional right of freedom of speech, and as a matter of practical human experience, there is a much more compelling reason for cultivating the habits of free men. We take, it seems to me, a naively self-righteous view when we argue as if the right to our opponents to speak were something that we protect because we are magnanimous, noble, and unselfish. The compelling reason why, if liberty of opinion did not exist, we should have to invent it, why it will eventually have to be restored in all civilized countries where it is now suppressed, is that we must protect the right of our opponents to speak because we must hear what they have to say. So it's taken quite a while, but this is his thesis. We must hear what they have to say. We've got some strongly connotated words here. Naively self-righteous. This is, of course, negative characterization of people who behave this way. And this is, naively self-righteous, but also based on the argument that he has made before, also very hypocritical. And in that case, he is saying that this is not true, that people who say that they are protecting others' right to speak because they are magnanimous, noble, and unselfish, may not be the case. The compelling reason why, if liberty of opinion did not exist, we should have to invent it, why it will eventually have to be restored in all civilized countries where it is now suppressed, is that we must protect the right of our opponents to speak because we must hear. So earlier, this is why I was focusing in on that date and fascism, is because of this phrase right here. It'll need to be restored in all civilized countries where it is now suppressed. So he's saying this is his this is his main argument and thesis. Let's see how he supports that argument. Paragraph 5. We miss the whole point when we imagine that we tolerate the freedom of our political opponents as we tolerate a howling baby next door, as we put up with the blasts from our neighbor's radio because we are too peaceable to heave a brick through the window. If this were all there is to freedom of opinion, that we are too good-natured or too timid to do anything about our opponents and our critics except let them talk, it would be difficult to say whether we are tolerant because we are magnanimous or because we are lazy, because we have strong principles or because we lack serious convictions, whether we have the hospitality of an inquiring mind or the indifference of an empty mind. And so, if we truly wish to understand why freedom is necessary in a civilized society, we must begin by realizing that because freedom of discussion improves our own opinions, the liberties of other men are our own vital necessity. So some things that I noticed right away. Because we. Right? This is it. There's some more. He is offering options. This is actually a fallacy itself, the either-or fallacy. Right? Pretty commonly used fallacy, though. And why, though, is it commonly used? It's because by contrasting these differing viewpoints, by associating those who would use their positions of power to silence others, they believe that they are magnanimous, they believe that they have strong principles, but in reality, they are lazy and lack serious convictions. They believe that they have the hospitality of an inquiring mind, but in reality, they have an empty mind. Why set it up this way? Why use an either-or? Well, it's because we definitely do not want to associate ourselves with laziness or empty-mindedness. We want to associate ourselves with these things. And it's also a way to say that people who would behave this way are, in fact, these things. We see some imagery and some metaphorical arguments here, some hypotheticals with the neighbor's radio and the baby. Instances that we are all personally familiar with. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or what country you live in. These are types of problems that you have to tolerate, right? But just because you tolerate them doesn't mean that you wish to understand them. And so if this is the way that people treat those who have differing opinions rather than actually hearing what they say, they just listen and wait for it to be over with so that it's their turn to talk, then those are the people who are in reality lazy and empty-minded. That's the argument. And we don't want to associate ourselves with those ideas. We want to be the other, right? We want to be the opposite of that. We want to be strong-principled and magnanimous. So if I was going to construct this in an essay, I would probably go with 1 through 3, paragraphs 1 through 3, where he defines political freedom. I would explain that, why it was necessary. I would talk about the refutation of the hypocrisy that was highlighted by the Voltaire quote. Right? And it's important that he's disagreeing with Voltaire. Beginning with paragraph 4, though, 4 and 5, we have that tone shift. We've got his main thesis. And then we have the supports of that. Okay. And then you might also throw in that the return of this idea to countries where it is now suppressed. And then I would talk about that. That part I would probably highlight to if I were able to show that I understand the history involved in this rhetorical situation. That is one of the ways of showing that I understand why he's talking about 1939 and how that's connected to this. If I were able to do that succinctly, that might be enough to earn me that sophistication point, if all else was accurate and concise. All right, so that's this essay that appeared in the Atlantic. Hopefully this helps you a bit. Remember, though, that it is not our place in this task to agree or disagree, but only to understand the opinion of Mr. Lippmann, which is coincidental, maybe a little bit ironic, that in this argument, our task in this argument is to do exactly what he's saying that we should be doing, is to try to understand it based on the situation rather than insert our own ideas. So, interesting essay. I hope this was some help to you.